Good afternoon. This is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding, here to discuss some of the tax issues, complications, implications, and consequences for taxpayers who are Americans but may have been living abroad for the past years. Very common for taxpayers to go overseas, whether it's just wanderlust or maybe it was for a potential job or fell in love or you had a plan B or C that didn't work out the way you thought. It's common for taxpayers who are Americans who had left the United States to want to come back to the United States. But before doing so or when they do so, there are some considerations and issues that may follow them back to the United States. So let's kind of work through this. First is, the United States follows what's called a worldwide income tax model for citizenship-based taxation of individuals. What does that mean? It means that the U.S. taxes individuals on their worldwide income, whether or not they live in the United States or they live abroad, whether or not the income is sourced in the United States or sourced abroad. The reason why is, unlike most other countries, the U.S. follows this CBT system, which just means that it's the global taxation, worldwide taxation is based on your tax status, not your resident. Most countries, you got to live in a country for at least 6 months, so you're considered a permanent resident, and then the worldwide income tax kicks in. In addition to worldwide income, there's also global reporting. It's international information reporting, which means taxpayers who are considered Americans, and typically that will be U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents who didn't make a treaty election, foreign nationals who meet the substantial presence test unless an exception applies, like the closer connection exception. But what it means is you have to also report your foreign accounts, assets, and investments. Common forms you may have heard of are the FBAR, Form 8938, Form 3520, 3520A, for U.S. ownership of a foreign trust, 5471, etc., etc. Now, even though the U.S. has this very intrusive and completely unfair tax system, there are ways that taxpayers may have been reducing or eliminating their overall net effective U.S. tax liability. Excuse me. The foreign earned income exclusion, foreign tax credits, and if they were American but considered a lawful permanent resident, maybe they made a treaty election to be treated as a foreign person for tax purposes under a treaty. So what are some of the common issues for Americans returning to the United States? Well, first, did the American file taxes, right? We're one of the few, we specialize exclusively in international tax and offshore disclosure, so we've heard everything, right? Some taxpayers believe if they made under the foreign earned income exclusion amount, currently I think it's around $120,000, that they didn't even have to file taxes, but that's not true. You have to file and then include the Form 2555 to exclude the income. Depending on which expat community a person is a part of, there's, if you've lived outside of the U.S. for 10 years and you can stop filing and they're never going to find you, which may be true, the not find one, but when you're coming back to the U.S., you become more of a target. So the question is, did they file taxes? If not, then they're already out of compliance, and the concern is whether the U.S. government may have already gone after them. Nothing nefarious, just, are there liens, are there levies, has their passport been revoked or denied, things like that. So that's something to consider. Were international reporting forms filed? The IRS has really been taking taxpayers to task when it comes to the international reporting. Some common forms are the FBAR, Form 8938, like we just discussed. The forms have different due dates and different requirements, but for the most part, even if a taxpayer lives overseas, they still have to file, they still have to report. So if they weren't doing that, that's something to think about before they re-enter the tax system. And another thing where tax is paid, a lot of times what will happen is a taxpayer was living overseas and, they may be in a country where there are no taxes, or they thought they fell under the foreign earned income exclusion, they didn't file. And so there's a tax liability, but they just haven't paid it. So that could be accruing interest and penalties and things like that, which may impact, how the U.S. government may put a lien on the taxpayer, may have already put a lien on, depending if the taxpayer had forwarded their information about their foreign address before they left to the IRS. Most people don't, because it's not uncommon to leave and think you're never going to come back, right? Totally normal human nature. Now that the taxpayer is back in the United States, what to consider? Well, one very important thing is FATCA, which is the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. Now, most foreign financial institutions started enforcing this in 2014, which means they started sending U.S. taxpayer information to the U.S. government, and vice versa. U.S. government does it for the foreign countries. But for some Americans, they may have signed up for their foreign bank accounts before FATCA was even in effect. So it's not until the taxpayer wants to update the institution about their address, assuming they're going to keep the account open, and then the bank may send them a letter asking them to acknowledge whether they're a citizen or not, a U.S. citizen or not, and that could lead to the foreign financial institution reporting the taxpayer. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So it's not that the foreign financial institution is necessarily picking out any particular taxpayer. It's just they will group send thousands of customers who are considered Americans to the U.S. government, so they have that information. Now, if the taxpayer has not been filing and they're going to start filing because they're coming back and they want to, then they may want to consider getting into compliance beforehand. Now, there are various amnesty programs available to taxpayers who are out of compliance. If the taxpayer hasn't filed and they meet the foreign residence requirement, they may qualify for what's called the streamlined foreign offshore procedures, and there's no penalty. Taxpayer goes back and files 3 years of returns and the international reporting forms and a non-willful certification, but it will help the taxpayer avoid all of the potential international reporting penalties that they may otherwise be subject to. If for whatever reason the taxpayer doesn't qualify for streamlined foreign because maybe they visited the United States more than 35 days a year in the past 3 years, then there are other options available as well, but streamlined domestic would not apply because they haven't filed the return. With streamlined foreign, you can file original returns. With streamlined domestic, you can only amend previous filed returns. So that brings me to a final important note. Please, please, please be aware and cognizant of the fear-mongering and scaremongering you will undoubtedly find as you decide you're going to come back to the U.S. You'll do some research, people giving away free consultations telling you the IRS is going to come find you, that everyone goes to jail, you didn't file your FBAR, you're going to get 50% penalties at least, and all the other fines and nonsense. Most of the time, it's just a civil issue. Most of the time, it can be, well, the majority of the time, okay? 95% of the time, taxpayers who are out of compliance can pretty safely get back into compliance. It doesn't necessarily require paying a huge penalty oftentimes, and especially for non-willful taxpayers who qualify for the streamlined foreign, there is no penalty. We have a ton of free information available on our main website and our sub-websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if it's appropriate to your matter and it's something that we handle here. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.